All right, we're rolling here with another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. We're joined today by a legend, Brad Kearns. What's going on?
Oh my gosh, what an honor to be with the Meat Mafia. And we are going to hit it hard because we got a little warmed up before we hit record, and we all agreed, man, let's bring this thing home and set everybody straight. Lots of hot topics to talk about. I can't wait.
Yeah. Do you be on your podcast? Do you like to do like the 10, 15 minute kind of like warm it up, get to know the guest before you record too?
Yeah, that's a good question, huh? It's interesting because you don't want to miss anything. And a couple times, my main regret has been like after some of the shows, and thanks for listening, everybody. And that's a great summary comment. And then the guest will, get on another roll, and some of that great stuff is missed after we stop. But beforehand, it's interesting. I listen to so many podcasts. I'm sure you guys do too. And, some of them are so heavy on the banter and the cool dudes or the gals who are hosting the podcast and giggling. And I went shopping the other day at the mall, and I go into the mall, and there's 4 shoe stores in every mall. And I'm just going forward, because, my time's valuable, and I want to get some juice, man. I want to get into the deep stuff. And so I try to kind of, go for the attack swing right away. But it's nice to have a little banter for the listener. So we're doing perfect timing so far. Now that shopping mall story is out of the way. That fake story. Yeah.
Well, let's get into the meat of it, because we don't really mess.
Meat Mafia.
We don't really mess around here at the Meat Mafia.
I mean, Brad's an honorary associate. Little bone. What do we do? The baptism by bone broth, we call it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's something we try to keep under wraps, but we try to. When we have a new member to the Meat Mafia like yourself, we give a little baptism by bone broth, which most people have taken a liking to, but if they don't, we kind of send them to the fish, if you know what I mean.
I'm in, man. It's probably like the Dead Sea. There's so much salt in bone broth, you could probably float if you really had a baptism.
Absolutely. Brad, we were saying too, prior to hitting record, before you jumped on, you're a tough guy to introduce just because you've done so many incredible things. Like, I'm looking at your Twitter bio right now. So we've got host of the B.Rad podcast, Guinness World Record Speedgolfer, New York Times best-selling author of multiple books with Mark Sisson. Harry and I have read a bunch of those books too. Unbelievable. #1 USA Masters 55 to 59 age group high jumper, and then former #3 ranked world pro triathlete. So there is a lot there. There's a lot of different disciplines.
It's a lot of time spanning a few of those different ones, especially the triathlon stuff. And I learned that you guys were Ironman triathletes before we started recording. So that's an amazing accomplishment. I congratulate you. Your performance is about 30 years more recent than my last Ironman. So we have 2 triathletes and one wannabe has-been on the podcast here today.
Well, Brad, where does your athletic background start? Was it with the triathlons, or were you doing other competitions before that?
Well, I was a runner in high school, and before that, I was like this superstar athlete in the park leagues, like the recreational leagues. And so I dreamed of heading off to the giant public high school in Los Angeles. That we're talking about a real powerhouse. It was called Taft High, and we have numerous players in the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. I mean, it was a major big city school, and I was this little guy walking onto campus at like, in freshman, I was like 5'2" and 105 pounds or something. But I was a good little athlete, and I love sports. But the very first day of school, when I saw the football team come out to practice, my friend and I were there looking at these guys, and we're like, man, those varsity players are huge. And someone said, that's not the varsity, man. that's the JV team. And so then the coaches come out and they said, what do you guys want? And I said, I want to know where the cross country team is. And he goes down the stairs over to the corner, and they're on the lower field. I'm like, okay, thanks. So I instantly became a runner as soon as I entered high school, because I had to do something, and it wasn't going to be one of the big sports. And that was really wonderful experience because as a kid in high school, you bond with your peers, and the running community is such a beautiful thing, cross country and track being co-ed sports. And so, you had this group of people, possibly you could call them the nerdy or the outcast, because, the centerpiece of the social scene is the big sports and all that. But I very quickly got serious thanks to my peers that were, driving me along. And so I had a pretty good career in high school. I was ranked 12th in the nation. I made National Junior Olympics finals in the 1500. I took 9th in the state championships of California in the mile, which is very competitive. And I dreamed of a career as a Division I runner. And I went off to UC Santa Barbara, and I got absolutely destroyed by the system, the machine that is Division I college athletics in every sport, including running. It's just so cutthroat. There wasn't a lot of sophistication of how they're training these young runners, especially the disparate needs of like a pretty fragile 17-year-old kid who showed up on campus and didn't have a lot of volume. And we're doing the same workouts as the grizzled fifth-year senior that had a nice beard like Brett. And, it wasn't a good fit for me. And I got sick or injured 5 seasons in a row. And so what was wonderful then, after my last injury, I was disgusted. I was so through with this whole thing. And the sport of triathlon was just emerging. This was back in the 80s. And the campus, UC Santa Barbara, was kind of a hotbed. There were some top level guys that were students at school that were racing on the pro circuit already and had names. And so I got a bike. I pedaled that thing until my brain's fried, because I couldn't run, but I could bike. And I jumped into the amateur triathlon scene and had a great time. And then soon after that, this great tragedy occurred in my life. And that was graduation from college, because I went from hanging out at the beautiful campus of UCSB and surfing if the surf was up, and going to class if it wasn't, and riding my bike and learning this great new sport. And then all of a sudden I was shipped out to downtown Los Angeles, driving in rush hour traffic every day, wearing a suit and tie, and working for the world's largest accounting firm. And so that experience lasted, that career lasted 11 and a half weeks. And I just was, completely torched. And it was just the most soul crushing thing I've ever experienced in my life. And so fortunately I retired and decided to pursue a career as a pro triathlete. And at that time in the 80s, that's kind of an oxymoron. There was hardly any such thing as a pro triathlete. There were a few guys at the very top. You probably heard of Dave Scott and Scott Tinley and Mark Allen, Scott Molina, the legends of the early days, and they were making a good living from sponsors and purses at the various races. But I was just this scrub that was a pretty decent runner from my college experience, but I had a long way to go. But the great thing, and I love to share this, I appreciate the tee up. You didn't think you were going to get a monologue answer, but when I made that career move, and I was free from something that the path that didn't feel right and didn't feel like my destiny, I was filled with the most tremendous source of energy and motivation and passion. And I went out there every day, and I just loved, the pursuit of excellence in this exciting new sport. And I wasn't really caught up in the measuring, judging forces of the world that so often influence our path, especially as young people looking to find ourselves. I was just focused on the pure enjoyment of the challenge. And so I was able to train really hard, but also really smart. And if I woke up tired one day or my knee hurt, I would just rest. It was like such an easy, insight. But then we let go of those things when we get too serious and focused and motivated and driven and influenced by outside sources. So I was just going along my merry way. I was a rookie on the pro circuit. I didn't have any sponsors. I didn't have any money. I was delivering pizza at night, and I'd go to a race and I'd get 17th, and I'd be so excited because my run split was in the top 5. I'd always have something positive to think of, even though I was getting smoked and I really didn't have any prospect of, making it as an athlete. But I'd go along, and then I'd get 11th at another race and have another, positive experience. I'd go to a little race, sneak in there and get a 3rd or 4th. And I remember when I got my first paycheck of $100, like my dad was so excited, he didn't even want to cash the check. He just wanted to frame it. In those days, you cash it, it's gone, the bank takes it. But it was, just this fun little interlude that was, who knows how long it was going to last. I had my accounting degree, and I wasn't worried about the future. I was just focused on the present. And then I went to this big race at the end of my first year as a wannabe pro triathlete, and I upset the undefeated #1 ranked duathlete, Kenny Souza, the greatest duathlete of all time. And also there was the #1 ranked triathlete in the world, Scott Molina. So I had this amazing surprise victory. And that immediately ushered me into this realm where I was a nobody, and now everyone wanted to know who I was. I was getting calls from sponsors. I was getting this idea that I could possibly make it as a pro. And so that was a big shift. And that was the wonderful start of my triathlon career. And I was on the circuit for 9 years. But I should mention that there was a lot of ups and downs, right? So these victories, I beat them again. There was a rematch, and then I smoked him by even more. So then I really established myself as like, wow, this guy is for real, and he's going to be a factor on the circuit. And then I started believing it myself and knew where I was headed. But then as you go along, I think sometimes we succumb to the pressure and the attention. And I remember thinking, wow, now I'm so accomplished that now it's time to get serious. Now I better time my workouts. Now I better not take a rest day. If my knee hurts, I got to work through it because everyone's expecting me to perform. And now people are paying me and people are watching me and all that stuff. And that, of course, is when I started to struggle. And I fell off that center of balance and the power that I had as that guy who was just happy to be out of the high rise and pedaling my bike down the beautiful Southern California coast. And I think that was the most important takeaway lesson that I can share from being that full immersion experience of an athlete, is that when you have a pure motivation, when you really enjoy the process and your heart's in the right place, that's when the results can happen naturally. And when you force it to happen, even in a career setting where you're angling and gaming and trying to, leverage this and leverage that instead of just doing the authentic hard work and letting things happen, that's when you're going to struggle and get slapped in the face. So there you go.
It's an amazing story. Brad, would you say that mindset that you talked about in that ethos, is that something that you've embodied for like the rest of your career, even after you retired from triathlon?
Yeah, good question. Thanks. I mean, the thing about life is we have to learn from our experiences. Otherwise, we don't qualify as getting mature or wiser. And we'll talk about my athletic exploits here at this advanced age group of 55 plus. Not everything about getting old is good. I'm kind of frustrated at my inability to recover like I could when I was a younger guy. But getting older and having a perspective and hopefully using all these experiences to make yourself a better person and a more astute person, making good decisions and having good attitude, that I think has really helped me. Because when you're in the athletic realm, there is no career that's more graphic representation of success and failure than being an athlete, especially being an athlete wearing a Speedo around, and you're exposed in every way. You're just out there and everyone's watching you. And when you get your ass kicked, less people talk to you at the finish line, and you get fewer phone calls returned and all that. And then when you win, you get this kind of artificial, it's not artificial, it's an incredible high. And it, almost nothing compares to it. It's like if you interview the guy who climbed Mount Everest on your next show, he'll tell you that being at the top of the world was amazing. And, okay, that's fine. Then what do you do the next day and the next day? And so having to adjust to the incredible highs of success as an athlete, and knowing that I'm not really going to approximate that coaching another athlete to great championship, but that feels rewarding in a different way. And so having that balance and not getting down on yourself when things don't go your way in life, because you have to get up off the mat and train the next day. And I learned that so many times that I think I became a resilient person against both success getting to my head and turning me into a dick, and failure turning me into a whiner and a complainer.
Brad, you mentioned this concept of being in the moment as you were kind of on your way up in the triathlon circuit. And that's something that it's kind of like this fleeting feeling, because everyone, or athletes, I feel like in general, know what it feels like to be in the moment and really like be present with, like, we were both baseball players. So I know like what it feels like to step in the batter's box and feel like, you're going to get a hit because you're hot or whatever it is. And it's the best feeling there is, but it's hard to capture. Is there anything you do to kind of keep yourself, as you've grown into all these different sports, like cue yourself up to get in that zone?
Oh man, I mean, if we had the secret to that, we'd be a general manager of some sports teams, and just address the team before the big game. Here's how to get into the flow state.
Yeah.
So it's something to ponder like throughout your entire life, isn't it? I mean, and then you look back on some of your successes, and I remember crossing the finish line, particularly on a couple races that were my best performances ever, and they were some of the easiest physical efforts. Like I wasn't really, dying at any time. And I remember getting to the top of the hill in this one race in Mexico, it was the ITU Pan American Championships in Ixtapa, Mexico. And there was the steepest climb we've ever seen on a bike course anywhere in the world. It was, 25% grade type of thing where you can't even, you're going to fall off your bike if you're not pedaling at full effort. And I got to the top of the hill and I looked back and there was nobody around. I was like, well, that wasn't that hard. But everyone described later how I dropped everyone. But there was 100 other races where I was the guy with his tongue hanging out, just trying to hang on and feeling frustrated and tense because I couldn't hang on, and someone else got the better of me. And so how do you capture that incredible feeling of, now I'm a golfer and I've had some great rounds where, I shot even par while playing speed golf as my best round ever one night by myself. Too bad it wasn't in a tournament. My best tournament speed golf round is 78, but I have a 71. The card's right here on the wall. And when I finished that round, I was like, I don't know what happened there, man, but it looks like all the putts went in and I hit every shot straight. And, you celebrate those and you relish those. But I think if it's like, even when you ask the question, my first thought was like, shit, I don't want to answer, because in searching to think for the answer, you just threw yourself off from getting into that flow state. It's like when, you hear sleep experts talking about sleep, and I will never listen to a sleep podcast except in the morning, because I don't want to talk about sleep anytime between 8 p.m. or later, because then I'm going to start thinking about it instead of falling asleep. And I think that's the same for the flow state. Like if you can follow these big picture principles where you're doing it for the right reasons and your life is well balanced and adjusted. And I've coached a lot of triathletes who did not have a well balanced or well adjusted life, and they were doing it as sort of escapism or an outlet for obsessive compulsive behavior. And you're just, I can tell just from talking to somebody whether their head is, in the right place or not. And I'm going to say also that there's a lot of elite athletes who set a poor example here, because they might be champs, they might have rings, they might have titles, and then you see them misbehave in real life and you're like, wow, what a jerk. He slapped up his girlfriend in the parking lot and got arrested. I guess the Super Bowl doesn't even help if you're an abusive person in real life. And so my heart goes out to the people who are tremendously successful in a competitive realm, but then can't get their shit together in real life. And I think we have a big problem with that these days. And it'd be nice to kind of maybe, just strive for personal improvement and not be so caught up in the rankings and the numbering of everything. I just had a guest on my podcast, Dr. Anna Lemke, author of Dopamine Nation. And she was saying, once the numbers get involved, that's when the dopamine triggers get out of balance, as opposed to when you're striving and you're trying to write your first novel, let's say. Guess what? It's never going to sell, listeners. If you're writing a novel, your chances are very poor that you're ever going to make a penny from it. But what an amazing experience for someone to sit down and write a novel about your childhood, loosely based on me and my brother who fished on the coast of Maine and caught these perch and sold them at the market, whatever. But the joy of the experience of knowing there's not going to be some outcome that you're fixated on, that's probably when you can better get into the flow state.
It's such a good point, because that's literally exactly what we're going through now, where we started just writing on Twitter, just like writing different threads on nutrition and blogging about our experiences with no expectation at all, besides like, hey, we're just best friends. We want to find a way to give some of this information to the world. And it's like fully flow state. You're just writing, you're not thinking about the end result. And hearing what you're talking about, having that experience when you were pro and you just simplified things, that's helpful to both of us, because especially as you start to think about like monetizing. It's easy just to think about the numbers and take away, like, this stuff is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a process. So it's just such good stuff.
Now, here's the thing I don't want anyone to misunderstand. While you're in this enlightened sources of motivation, it's also perfectly acceptable to be competitive as hell. And you can be a savage beast out there on the race course. And I wanted to win so badly. And I was willing to, run myself into the ground in the tropical heat just for one place in a race. But those are not mutually exclusive. And I think a lot of us get confused there, where we choose out of the competitive aspects of society and just formulate a bunch of self-limiting beliefs like, I'll never be a leader in the workplace. I'm just content to do my little sub potential sort of offering, and then offer up, critical statements about the excess of wealth in our capitalist society and how disgusting that is, and blah blah blah, and then go back to your your corner. And so I think we need to embrace the idea that we can be striving for our very best, and accept the challenge of competition without backing down or trying to talk our way out of it. Like, hey, we're just here to have fun. I'm thinking of an anecdote. One of my son's great youth coaches, he was in very competitive youth basketball. He was a good little player, and then he got thrown into the AAU scene, and it was just so gnarly and so intense. But this guy, the coach, had such a great way of throwing these kids into an incredibly competitive environment, but doing it for the right reasons and offering the right message in the right circumstances. And one time I was kind of frustrated, and I was having a talk with him, and I said, I mean, isn't it all about having fun? Isn't that the first priority, Coach Ken? And he goes, you know what? It's not. Fun is not the first priority of youth sports. If these kids want to have fun, we will get a bucket of water balloons, and we'll go to the park, and we'll play Nerf football with water balloons at the end, and have pizza and ice cream. That's fun. This number one priority of youth sports is to give the youth a positive experience. And a positive experience can be getting your ass kicked by a superior team, because you should see little 8th graders that are building up too much swagger because they're pretty good at basketball. And then we go to the big tournament and get their asses handed to them by kids who are dunking in 8th grade. And it's a beautiful, positive experience because it recalibrates whatever their chances of running off that path to becoming arrogant little buddies. And then also winning the championship and beating up on inferior teams and learning how to be on top is also a positive experience. So the outcome, it transcends the outcome. And that's the same for every triathlete on the starting line. When you have 2 flat tires at Kona, and you're the number one guy in the world, Mark Allen, and you're supposed to win, and you lose 15 minutes, oh my gosh. And how are you going to come back from that? It's so devastating. But he leveraged all that failure into becoming the greatest of all time. And I'm sure triathlon listeners know his story, but this guy failed and failed and failed again, even though he was the number one ranked triathlete. And then he finally got the formula right, and he won 6 in a row at the Ironman. And so his neat little package is 6 failures in Hawaii, followed by 6 runaway victories. And it just kind of is a good lesson for someone who's failed once or twice. You get up and keep going, provided you love it and you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, I love it. Is there a moment in time over your athletic career that sticks out to you that you're particularly proud of, or that, stands out as kind of a turning point for you?
Well, that first victory was probably the biggest turning point that could ever possibly happen, because I was on the borderline of, delivering pizzas and going back to work in accounting. And so it's always nice to have a breakthrough. And you know what? I deserved it, because I was training really hard, and I was, not caught up in doing things that were for the wrong reasons. And when you work hard and you put in your dues and you smile and you're able to accept defeat like a honorable competitor, one day your day will come. And so that's a nice reference. And then today I'm 57 and I'm still really competitive, and I want to have this, I promote this ideal on my website. It says pursue peak performance with passion throughout life. And I think that encapsulates what I'm all about and what I want to share with others, because I think a lot of us everyone has their story back in the day. You guys were baseball players. You would have got drafted by AA, but your shoulder, you hurt your shoulder, and then this happened and that happened. Everyone's got their story, however it came out, and then the rest of your life, you sit there. Not you guys, but the rest of our lives, we sit there and we watch TV and we watch others perform, and that seemed to be good enough for millions and millions of people. And I contend that if we can get a little charge going in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't have to be continuing to try to play baseball your whole life because third base is all it could be going from baseball to the Ironman. Or for me, now I'm a high jumper and a sprinter and a speed golfer. It has nothing to do with triathlon, nor do I want to be involved with any more participations there because I've been there and done that. But when I clear the high jump bar in an empty high school stadium that I hopped the fence to get into with my own high jump standards because of COVID and all that, I'm screaming with delight, and I have that same sense of accomplishment, the same level of intensity of feeling that joy and elation that I did when I won the big race that was televised on ESPN, and I got the oversized check and the interviews and the people clapping. And so to me, that's what life's all about, is to have that competitive edge directed in the proper, under the proper circumstances. And then you're getting up in the morning with purpose and passion and joy. And of course, us three can put in a plug for doing things that are athletic and physical because our lives are so contained and confined. But if you're a painter and that's your thing, you can still get the same, you can enter the flow state, you can have all that tremendous satisfaction. But I do think we got to get out there and get physical and pursue goals of some nature where we're out there, trying to balance what's increasingly comfortable and indulgent modern life.
And that's what we love about guys like you and Mark. I know you said you're 57. I think Mark is like 68, right?
Man, we're getting old. It
so
sounds old when you say it. Yeah.
Mark's got a decade on you, but no, we just think it's so cool because like you're talking about these beliefs that are programmed into you by mainstream society. Like, I mean, we've heard that too. Like even, we're 27, 28, but we even, with some of our coworkers, once you hit 35, things start to go downhill. And that's why it's so cool to connect with guys like you and Mark, where it's like, yeah, in theory, you're aging or the number is going up, but it's like you guys are ripped up, metabolically healthy. I tried to do your, you have a video on YouTube. I think it's like an ab and mobility routine. It's like
my morning routine. Yeah,
that thing kicked my ass after like 10 minutes, but it was awesome.
Good to know, man.
So I'm just curious, and I don't know how easy it is to distill it down, but like, what are some of the longevity principles that have, helped you get better and better as you've gotten older?
Well, I think avoiding those mistakes and the excess that we can easily drift into when we're in those peak competitive circumstances. And so when I was on the pro circuit for 9 years, I am not joking when I contend that I probably aged 15 or 16 or 17 years, literally from a biological perspective. So I raced on the circuit from age 20 to age 30. And when I finished at age 30, I finished because I was burnt out, not because, I probably would have kept going if I was still winning, but I was starting to lose my competitive peak and there was no going back to it. And my body just wasn't responding to training. And I, in many ways, felt like I was 80 years old when I woke up in the morning because I had this severe plantar fasciitis. I couldn't put weight on my left foot for years until I hopped on one leg out to my jacuzzi and turned on the jets and did my foot circles. And then I could finally walk and then put on a running shoe and go run 6 miles or 12 miles or whatever. But I was, I was constantly tired, had all kinds of, fatigue issues and inconsistent training patterns because of all the jet travel and all the racing. And so that didn't do me any favors. And I'm basically trying to make up for that in the ensuing decades by pursuing a broader concept of what fitness is all about, introducing the strength training and the sprinting and the things that are super important for health, wellness, longevity, and getting away from the extreme endurance patterns that we now know can be really compromising to your health, including cardiovascular health, heart disease risk, the risk of atrial fibrillation and long-term competitive endurance athletes is now coming to the forefront as a serious thing, and just the hormonal problems associated with excess training. And of course, that's common in the endurance scene, but it's also common in the CrossFit community and the gym scene of well-minded enthusiasts that go and do boot camp 3 days a week, and the other 2 days they do spin class, and their heart rate is getting taken through the roof for 47 minutes straight, and they're wondering why they're not losing weight and why they have hormonal problems down the line. And so I think the fitness industry in general is pushing people too hard, the messaging and the programming, and then all the branded competitive stuff like Ironman, like marathons, like ultras. I mean, it's a wonderful bucket list item, but I might not make friends with a lot of endurance athletes when I say this, but I contend that, like, if the Ironman were the half Ironman, in other words, if Ironman was 70.3 miles and the Ironman was a swim 1.2, bike 56, run 13, we'd all be better off, including the spectators who don't have to wait, including the announcer. I once was the sole announcer for the California Ironman that was 17 hours, right, from start to finish with no break. It was the hardest thing I've ever did, harder than any race, announcing for 17 hours. It's like, at the end, I was joking around, it's getting near midnight, and I'm like, attention, all participants, please report to the finish line immediately. I want all participants to finish the damn race so we can go home,
Yeah.
But when you kind of get lured into thinking that this represents the ultimate athletic accomplishment, we have to ask, is this a good fit with my life or not? And in a lot of cases, maybe it's more, laudable to kick ass in the neighborhood 5K that you train for 6 months and learn what it's like to, run with good form and put in some sprinting and some different workouts, and your race is over in 15, 20, 25 minutes rather than 14 hours and 47 minutes. No offense. I mean, it's still a great bucket list accomplishment, but sometimes it's easy to get out of balance when you're piling on all these ambitions.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you when you are thinking about things through the lens of longevity. And why shouldn't you be thinking about things through that lens if you're thinking about your entire life? How would you distill your principles down for your day-to-day life now that you try to really harness, like Brett was talking about with your morning routine? Are there things that you do that really kind of encapsulate this longevity mindset that you have?
Yeah, thanks. I think one of them we kind of touched on is getting this mature and stable perspective on the ups and downs of life, because we're not, we don't study in high school or college dealing with divorce, death, bankruptcy, wayward teenage escapades when you're the parent. No one teaches us how to deal with this stuff, and we don't know what's coming. And so it's important to kind of keep your cool, control your emotions, have that big picture perspective, and understand that we have to go on no matter what, even if we have to overcome a lot of difficulty. And so that part has taken a lot of years to realize that it's not going to be cotton candy and caramel peaches every day in life. And so when you can kind of maintain that healthy perspective on the stuff that you're doing, so you're Roger Bannister, the first sub 4 minute mile guy, he had a great quote. He says, in sport, and you can fill in the blank if you're not a sporty, but he said in sport, the essence of sport is when you're doing it, nothing else matters. But when it's over, you generally file it away in a place that's not very important. And I love that quote because it's what I was talking about before, where go ahead and compete your ass off, but when it's over, smile, go out for beers after your rugby match in the park, and then go on with your life and don't get too caught up in your success nor your failure. And so that's one. And then the other one is just framing my day to withstand all these adverse forces that are upon us now with digital age, digital technology, mobile technology, the constant potential for distraction, indulgence, instant gratification. And unlike you guys, I'm old enough to remember like half of my freaking life until I was around your age. There was no internet, there was no mobile device. And so I had this experience of going over to a friend's house and hanging out and sitting around talking, and then watching our favorite show that came on at 9 p.m. on Thursday nights. And that was it. And you got to watch it and then it was over, instead of, now we can binge on 6 shows in a row. And those things are so different. And it's kind of an onslaught these days with stuff that can take you off some of the most important things that make us human. And I guess that's what the ancestral health movement is all about, is trying to regain and recapture some of these things. My buddy Liver King, the Instagram sensation, he's now showing us that, we should strap up with chains and walk down the driveway carrying hundreds of pounds, or jump in the cold water. And the whole point of that is, indeed, when we've gone soft as a species, it's very valuable and enriching to put yourself into the adversity, and then have a mini accomplishment. Just like jumping in my chest freezer is a miniature example of overcoming adversity and overcoming the frailties of the human brain and our motivation and our willpower, and doing something, and then proving that you can be a stronger person in the face of all manner of stress and adversity. And then also distraction, because I fight that myself every day. The email inbox is there waiting for answers, and I'm supposed to be writing a book. And so it's a constant battle. But when I can start my day with my morning exercise routine, so there's my plug. I just launched a digital course to teach you all about it. You can go look at it on bradkearns.com. And it's been such a life-changing thing for me, because even as an athlete, it wasn't a big area needs to improve area of my life ever. I've always got my workouts in. I've always been fit. I haven't let myself go. Nevertheless, it was always, what workout might I do today? Or might I be too busy? Maybe it's a rest day. Oops, I got caught up on the computer and I didn't do anything. I never had this consistency, this very basic baseline level of being an active human every single day. So I started, now it's a streak of 5 years plus, like 5.5 years. I have not missed a single day of doing this template morning exercise routine that started very, very modestly with, I just decided to do some basic core and leg movements every day because I was getting too sore after my sprint workouts, and I wanted to kind of become more resilient for the hard workouts that I only did once in a while. So I started doing this thing, and then I slowly added to the template over time. So I'd introduce a new workout, a new exercise, and throw it in there. But the key factor is I do the same exact thing every day. So I start with 40 hamstring raises, leg kickouts. I switch sides. I do 20 frog legs in each direction. I do 20 scissors. Then I do 20 bicycles. Then I do 20 bicycles reverse side. Then I do 50 crunches. And so I'm counting myself through each exercise in the sequence. It's now become a pretty impressive workout by itself. But it started at 12 minutes. It was nothing. It was easy. And now it's 40 minutes. And some stuff at the end is pretty strenuous, where I'm doing dumbbell raises or something that leaves me breathing hard for a short time. And when I'm finished with the workout, then, I enter the realm of real life. But to prove to myself that every day, where I am as soon as I get out of bed. I do not reach for my phone. 84% of Americans reach for the phone as their first act upon awakening. And half of that 84% reach for the phone while still in bed, implying that the phone is plugged in within reach of their head. So they're getting EMFs and Wi-Fi all night. And then they're immediately going into this dopamine triggering instant gratification reactive mode when they handle their device. And so to overcome that and put something into place where I'm not worried about succumbing to that, that's been life-changing for me, because I'm just as distractible as anybody else.
There's so much good information there. And I needed to make sure we give a plug to the Liver King too, because he's awesome. And the MoFo supplement, the male optimization formula, I used that maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago. It's freaking awesome. I noticed like an increase in energy. One of the best supplements that I've ever used, by the way. And nice. Liver King's interesting too, because Harry and I talk about this a lot. It's like he's got these 9 ancestral tenets. He works out so hard. He's doing so much good for the world. But people, like, because he's so jacked, people love to just focus on, oh, is he juiced up or is he not juiced up? And it's like, that's so irrelevant from the message that he's preaching, but people love to just isolate this one variable and focus on it,
Yeah, it's such an honor to be accused of being artificially enhanced, and I joke with Brian all the time about that, like sending him clips of some of the most audacious comments about it. But it's truly like it's human nature to try to discount somebody that's gone to the extremes. And let me tell you, I've spent time with him at his house and his environment. There's no one who combines that level of training with that level of dietary sophistication and correctness. And so if you look at a bodybuilder or a CrossFit champ, like Matthew Fraser, one of the greatest CrossFit athletes ever, he's talking about how he munches Snicker bars in between his sets. And it's a great, the best snack he's found. And, these guys are shoveling in the athletes in the professional sports. A lot of them are getting better about diet, but they're not having a 5-day water fast every quarter like Liver King, and having that clean and that nutrient dense of food intake every day. So if you combine the most cleanest eating athlete probably of all time and the hard training that he does, that's at a level of the most hardest training CrossFitters and bodybuilders, that's how you're going to look. So that's my plug for thinking, not only do I think he's natural, I also don't care if he's enhancing, because guess what? If he's 5% advantage because he's got a doping regimen, take off 5% of what he looks like, he still blows away anybody out there. So it's sort of irrelevant. It's sort of like asking, I wonder if the tour guys are doping. Well, maybe they all are, but if they weren't, they'd be 8 minutes slower on Alpe d'Huez, which is 27 minutes faster than the best guy in your town anyway,
Yeah, it's a good point. I remember maybe like 3 years ago when he first started selling supplements, prior to him being on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and everything. He just had a blog where on his website, where he would like describe his day-to-day regimen and his 9 ancestral principles. And I think there was like one picture of him. And I remember just reading everything and being so blown away, just thinking to myself, I wish I could just see what this guy's routine actually looks like, or like, is this guy even real? Because if he's real, people would absolutely love his content. And now I don't think it's a surprise that he's blown up so quickly, because he's a freak of nature. But the consistency is what you're talking about. Even with you, how you talked about how you've crafted that workout up to 40 minutes and you haven't missed in over 5 years. Like, that's the stuff that people it's like, they don't want to hear you say, oh, what's your secret? It's consistency, because that's not sexy, but it seems like that's been pretty core to your longevity and your success.
Yeah, I think for all of us, we have to take some baby steps forward, and it has to be on your own volition. And we have enough information out there. Most people know exactly what foods they should eat and shouldn't eat, or they're close enough. I shouldn't say that, because some people are really being deluded and brainwashed these days with some nutrient deficient dietary strategies that are becoming very popular. But back to my point, if you can, do something that's doable and sustainable and enjoyable to you, and if that means you only have 5 minutes in the morning because you got 2 little rugrats that you have to get up and get off to school, and then you're off to the next thing, take that 5 minutes and make a sincere commitment to yourself to do a little breathing, stretching regimen every single day. And then you build on these little successes. #1 best-selling book in the world right now, Atomic Habits, James Clear, he talks about this, where his silly example of committing to floss 1 tooth every night if you're not a good flosser. And so he's dead serious when he says, just promise yourself you'll do 1 tooth and never miss 1 tooth. And then that person is more likely to excel at building a flossing habit, because the entry bar is low enough to where we're not becoming intimidated and, our own worst enemy of getting overwhelmed. And so I think that represents the story of my morning routine. Like people ask me, do you feel like doing it every day? And the answer is maybe not, but I've transcended this realm of asking myself whether I feel like doing it or not. So I don't even judge it as hard or easy. I don't need to pat myself on the back too hard by completing it every day, because I do it every day. It's like, and it's an interesting thing for my psychology, because I don't have too many examples like that, where I've transcended those very fragile elements of motivation and willpower. I can't say the same when I walk in the gym. I have to get psyched to go lift those heavy weights. It's not my favorite thing. And I do it because I love how it applies to my athletic goals more so than just the joy of going and grunting through a set of deadlifts. But with the morning routine, it's just automatic, like robot behavior where it's something I don't even think about. And that's the definition of, an optimal habit.
Mm. Brad, you mentioned your books earlier. Was that something that had you always been sort of influenced by writing, or been someone who wanted to author a book and do something in that space? Or was that something that you really had to be intentional about in terms of, because that's no small feat. I mean, I think athletes can really do a lot of things athletically and excel that way. But when it comes to like doing other creative endeavors, it takes a lot of energy to actually do that. So
yeah, thanks, Harry. Another good question to get me reflective for a moment. And I remember kind of I was I would say kind of not the perfect fit for regimented school system. I took Gretchen Rubin's 4 Tendencies quiz. I turned out that I'm the rebel, which is no surprise. I like to do things my way, and I always like worked my own path in life. And so I remember being in school and being so bored that I just write stories, and they were like maybe fake sports stories about me starring in the Super Bowl. And then some of my friends would do it too, and we'd read the stories to each other. So it was definitely my area of interest, and I think best performance in school, as opposed to math and science and things that I had no interest in. And so then as an athlete, going for that stint of time in my youth, I thought it was really important to balance that physical lifestyle with something that was completely different. And so I made a deliberate effort to sit down at the computer and write and do something sedentary. We're telling everybody, hey, get off your computers more and get out there and exercise and take a hike. And so imagine this opposite guy who every day I was up and out the door for hours and hours on the bike, swimming laps in the pool, running through the trails. And so it was a great joy to actually sit down and chill. And so I wrote articles for the triathlon magazines when I was racing. And I remember some of them being well received. And so I was encouraged to write more. And then I wrote a book about my experience as a pro triathlete, especially getting there from childhood. And so that, things just went from there. And I don't know what else to say about that. It's kind of a good example of something where if you persevere through difficult challenges, like I was talking about the novel example before, these are the things that bring us a rich and meaningful life, something that we have to struggle through and persevere, and it's not easy. And therefore you get this nice payoff of the sense of satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, Mark and I have said like 5 times in a row, that was the last book. We'll never do this again, because it is torturous. And these days, I think we're inundated with so much information. It's like actually putting together a book and having each sentence make sense and be thoughtful and well organized is like a lost art almost. Now we have, sound bites from Instagram's too long. So now we have to go to TikTok, right, for a 7-second discussion of how to eat healthy rather than open up a book. So it's wonderful that some people still like to purchase and read books. I think it's maybe only 10% of society, but that's great, because someone's got to lead the charge here and spread the word.
It's funny how you say you and Mark say you'll never write a book, yet here you are 4 books later. So
every time, never again. Well, one thing is like, and Mark says this all the time, like I can tell you everything you need to know in 1 page. And you went to Liver King's 9 ancestral tenets. That is his attempt to cover all the, evolution inspired behaviors that made us humans, and, throw them into busy, hectic modern life. Get out there and get grounded, get sun, get cold, eat the healthy foods, get rid of the junk foods, all that stuff. And so I think the rest of it's like trying to connect and trying to make an impact. that's when you have to get creative. And, you guys could do 3 podcasts and tell all your listeners everything that you've learned about health encapsulated into this, try to eat nose to tail, stay away from stuff that blows your gut out. It's all done in 3 hours of talking, and then you're done. Goodbye. And it's over. But I think we need that constant reminders and reinforcement. And that kind of keeps me going, because the more we engage ourselves, right, you guys are not going to be likely to fall off your path, because you're in it in depth, and having another interview and another person to learn from. And so I love that constant education and that constant immersion to keep us honest.
Absolutely. So good. Go
Brad,
ahead.
Who are people who have inspired you along the way, like health idols or just idols in general, that have had an influence on you?
It's a good, Sisson, we've worked together for so long, and he's such a prominent force and has affected so many lives. And he's been a great mentor in a career sense, and a personal friend for so long. And some people don't know that our relationship started long ago, back when I was racing on the pro circuit, and he became my coach early in my career. And so his career as a triathlete and a marathoner predates mine by, I think he's 12 years older than me or something. So, I was a 24-year-old young pro racer. He was a retired athlete and, off working in personal training and the other nutrition things that he was doing. But we had a great coaching relationship for many years that helped me reach my best height on the pro circuit. When I was at my very best, I was ranked number 3 in the world. I was national champion, and everything was clicking well. And a lot of it was thanks to his innovative training methods and strategies that were kind of off the beaten path back then, where we were just all about seeing how much mileage we could put in. And he had a more nuanced approach that was a little more prioritizing the workouts that would give you fitness breakthrough, and then being better about resting on other workouts. So that's been, a big influence for me. And then my dad, who passed at the age of 97 back in 2019, he had the most amazing ride that any of us could ever dream of. And it was essentially 95 years of incredible, awesome health, no complaints. He was one of the greatest golfers, probably the greatest golfer in the world over age 90 for 5 years when he was playing at a high level. And then he started to slow down, and it was pretty, I guess you could say, a pretty steep slide down, a very, gentle and painless slide for the last 2 years, where he just started to get more tired. And he went from playing 18 holes to playing 9 holes. And then after that, he went to just hitting practice shots. And then instead of going to the golf course, we'd hit practice shots in the backyard. And then, his walk around the park every day, we'd walk him a half a mile around the park every day. And then it was a quarter mile, and then it was to the bench and back, and then it was across the backyard. And it's just like how we could all dream of just slowing down, like throttling down on the throttle of the motorcycle, gearing down, and then having, a pleasant goodbye after living a long, meaningful life. So he set an example in many ways, because he was committed to health and also this balanced perspective. Golf suited him perfectly, because he never got mad out on the course. He'd hit a bad shot and he'd say, "Oh my goodness, what a terrible shot. Now I'm in big trouble. Let me go find my ball in the trees," and then get over the ball and hit a perfect punch shot out to the fairway. Instead of, a lot of golfers, including myself, will get into that a little bit of higher emotional charge than necessary, and it compromises our performance. And the funny thing about endurance and triathlon racing is, like, none of that stuff matters. So if you're frustrated or you're experiencing negative emotions, you just shift into a different gear and hammer away. And so there was no nuance where you had to control your temper, your emotions, or any of those things. And that's what I like about these different athletic challenges that I have now. And for example, high jump is the most technically complex track and field event, or at least it's vying for being one of those. And it's not just about the raw physical energy of the long jumper sprinting down and hitting the board and jumping as far as you can, because you have to transfer speed, horizontal energy into vertical energy. And so it requires precise technique. And it's a huge challenge for me, and I'm constantly trying to improve. And I'm not necessarily, the genetic specimen that was born to be a high jumper. I'm just not, but I love it so much that I don't care. And at this age, the fact that I'm still out there and able to bend over the bar puts me higher in the rankings than, when I was in high school and they couldn't even make the team because I was a skinny little endurance guy that ran circles around the track.
Brad, how important has food and nutrition been for you?
Well, back when I was doing the triathlon stuff a long time ago, I was, of course, following the recommendations for the optimal athletic diet at the time, and that was a grain-based high carbohydrate diet. So, wishing that we had some of this information back then, definitely would have had a more optimal diet than I had. But interestingly, like when you're training at that level and you're an elite level endurance athlete, I was actually highly fat adapted back then without even trying, just from the training, not in spite of my high carbohydrate diet. And I remember one experience where Johnny G, who's a fitness celebrity, he was the creator of spinning. He created indoor cycling and the spinning program. He was training for a race across America. So he'd do these super long rides, and he was experimenting with innovative dietary strategies back then. And one day he said, what we're going to do today is ride 100 miles with no calories. And I was used to bringing a peanut butter and banana sandwich and a bag of licorice and a bag of date balls and a bunch of powder to make more and more Gatorade. And we just throw these calories in as we strive to ride 100 miles and feel good. And I felt fine that day because I was able to kick into fat burning and all these things that we talk about today as, great breakthroughs in your conditioning. So if you get in great shape, you can transcend a lot of the nuances of having to eat a perfect diet. But I think for the average, enthusiast here, what we want to do is optimize our physical training as well as our diet. And so that's been, a major quest my whole life. And what's been a little bit, exasperating is how, we think we know everything, and then we're exposed to new information, and we have to constantly reset and recalibrate and strive very hard to maintain an open mind and think critically. And so talk about a turning point. You asked me about, the race that was a turning point in my career. And back in 2008, when I met up with Sisson to discuss working on this book project, The Primal Blueprint, he said, okay, here's the thing. This is like an ancestral hunter-gatherer diet. So you don't eat any grains, because grains came along when civilization started. And I didn't know any of this. I guess I didn't pay attention in anthropology, but that was the catalyst to begin human civilization, was the cultivation of grains and later livestock. And before that, we were hunter-gatherers. Who knew? And so we had to have basically an animal-based diet. And we were capable of, consuming plants. But I believe strongly, like from what Paul Saladino talks about this a lot in the research with the modern day hunter-gatherers, humans evolved and we advanced to higher brain function by gaining access to nutrient-dense foods, which were primarily the marine life and the high omega-3 fish, and then the nutrient-dense animal foods that we were able to, eventually get better and better at conquering and rising to the top of the food chain. And so not to get too controversial, but when you're looking at today where we have the choice of eating however we want, and we're going to exclude animal foods, we're turning our back on evolution and why we dominate over the gorillas that spend 11 hours a day chewing leaves and stuff to get enough nutrition for their small functioning brains. So that's my one little rant there. But yeah, diet's really important. And it's, I think, important now. A great trend that I see is this trend toward self experimentation and self optimization, and figuring out, instead of just jumping into a camp and debating and sending comments back and forth, try it yourself, come back, show me your six pack, right? If you want to walk your talk. And that's why I love Timothy Noakes' anecdote, where he's one of the foremost, if not the foremost, exercise physiologists in the world. And so his life's work is based on this high carbohydrate model for endurance training, and the muscles use glycogen, and then you refill the glycogen and carbo loading. And so he got into this keto low carb movement by accident, because he was diagnosed as pre-diabetic, even though he was an ultra marathon runner. And this is going against all his belief systems and life's work, but he just tried it on a whim and lost 22 pounds in short order and corrected all his blood work that was identifying him as pre-diabetic. And so he went to a international conference and stood up on the stage and said, I don't know what to tell you guys. I know we all disagree with this, but look at me. I lost 22 pounds and, my blood work's better. So what do you want me to say? Like, what else is there to say about that? And so that's kind of obvious that if something's working for you, that's great. But then the other thing that I think about all the time is Dr. Paul Saladino, a strong promoter of the animal-based diet, author of the Carnivore Code. He says, look, what we're talking about here is going maybe from level 7 to level 9, right? Why not strive for better? And raise your hand if you know what freaking level you're on, because we do not know. I don't know if I'm at level 7 or level 9. Maybe this is the absolute best I'll ever be, and everything else is downhill. But I have this mentality that there's maybe more peak performance potential for me if I can continue to optimize and strategize and refine my workouts and refine my diet. And that entails testing and being open-minded and being willing to experiment. And of course, we're talking about jumping over the first hurdles. Like, look, if you're consuming a lot of processed food and you have refined industrial seed oils in your diet, maybe you could put this recording on pause right now, go through your house, throw that shit away so we can have a responsible conversation about health and diet optimization. So it's not like we're going to be going back to, the fried food podcast and seeing if we feel better doing that. We know from enough undisputed research that some of this stuff is bad for us. But then once we've cleaned the decks and we're open and willing to experiment and explore, then there's all kinds of things to talk about and all kinds of things to test out. And there probably is some personalization to it. Although I hear that sometimes as a throwaway line where people are like, hey, everything's individual. So, vegan works for some people and carnivore works for other people. Well, wait a second. We're all humans. We all have Homo sapiens genetics. We all have a need for fully formed vitamin A called retinol. And when we consume beta carotene as our main source of vitamin A, it takes 21 times more chemical reactions than consuming it in its direct form. And this is, kind of insights that we need to reflect on before we think that we know it all.
Yeah. So, Brad, what does a standard day of eating look like for you? Are you pretty consistent with the foods that you're putting in your body?
Well, I'm consistent in the way I start out, and this has been, again, a new experiment that's only about 6 weeks old now. And I typically would fast or just nibble on dark chocolate. I'm a huge dark chocolate connoisseur, and that might be the stuff that trickles into my caloric intake before my first proper meal, which was typically late morning or midday. That's been my pattern for a long time. And we know all these wonderful benefits of fasting and restricted eating windows. But personally, again, back to that theme, I am a guy who is trying to perform magnificent athletic feats at an advanced age. And so I do intense workouts that are very challenging to me. So if we're taking notes and we're making a stress scoreboard and we're writing down the stress factors that we have in our life, one of my stress factors is age 57. The other one is still tries to do intense workouts like high jumping and sprinting at age 57. And then you have to put this on the stress side of the scoreboard: fasting, carb restriction, time restricted feeding, doing things in the name of cellular health and metabolic health that are nevertheless stress factors to the body. So I've tried for the last 6 weeks to get up and soon after, when I finish my morning exercise, I will go hit a big bowl of fruit and this amazing super nutrition smoothie that I make every day that's got a lot of performance agents in there. I'm actually coming out with a product that combines whey protein and creatine, which I think are the two most important things that all of us need, whether we're 27 studs like you guys or 57 like me trying to hang on, to preserve that muscle mass in the decades ahead. And so I have a huge smoothie and a lot of fruit instead of fasting to assess the results for me as per my main goal, which is to perform and recover as a fitness person. And Rob Wolf, great leader in the ancestral space, he had one of the most epic one-liners that's ever been uttered on my podcast or any other. And he said, look, if you want to live longer, lift more weights and eat more protein. And the context was he was sort of countering the fascination with, for example, caloric restriction for longevity. And the rats live longer because if you cut their food in half, and all this kind of stuff has, I think, been taken out of context a bit, to the point where we might be doing ourselves a disservice when we stack too many stressors.
Bless you. You good? The cough or sneeze?
Yeah. So in my case, like, here's the old guy doing the hard workout and fasting. And fasting is a stressor. The way that fasting and carb restriction and keto work is they activate the stress response to liberate energy from storage. That's making glucose if we need to, or taking the glycogen out of storage, taking the fat out of storage. And so we're spiking these stress hormones as a genetically programmed instinct for survival. We need to have a constant level of glucose in our bloodstream at all times, no matter what. It's very, very delicate. It's 5 grams or 4 to 5 grams in, what is it, 7 or 8 liters of blood volume in the average person. So you think about a teaspoon of glucose is optimal blood glucose. So no matter what happens, whether we eat or don't eat, we are always going to be optimizing our glucose through all kinds of mechanisms, including turning on the stress response to make glucose from muscle tissue if we're starving, right? Or make it from fat oxidation, like in the wonderful story of the benefits of ketone burning. But I'm more concerned about minimizing the overall stress score in my life. And that's the rationale for my experiment. I have to give huge credit to Jay Feldman of the Energy Balance podcast, because he's conveying these messages in great detail. And I listen to a lot of that. And also, my blood work is fine, right? It's excellent. My triglycerides are 27, and some experts have told me that's too low. So in other words, I should go and try to eat more sugar to raise my triglycerides, which is a very prominent heart disease risk factor when they get too high. So the next person, and I think when we're talking to the mainstream, most people eat too much food. They eat too much shitty food that is hard to burn for energy, and they don't move enough. They don't exercise enough. They don't empty their glycogen tanks enough. And so the general message, I think, we wrote a book called 2 Meals a Day. Wouldn't that be great if culture shifted from this 3 square meals a day to the mentality that we only need 2 meals a day, no matter who we are, unless we're going for the CrossFit games, then you might need 5 or 6 meals, right? But in general, the principles of, being more active, cutting out the junk food, and not overeating would be very helpful. But I think in probably, your audience demographic, most of us are going to nod our head in agreement and say, you're working out pretty well. You're trying to make sensible food choices, and we definitely don't want to overdo it. And we see this very commonly, especially in the female athlete, because the female is more calibrated for reproductive fitness, which requires preservation of body fat and hormonal balance. And when you're doing CrossFit workouts and going keto, and you're a female, now your stress score is looking pretty gnarly, because you're going against your evolutionary drive for reproduction, which is the preeminent human biological metabolic drive. And the most extreme or obvious example that we can all relate to is in elite female endurance athletes. It's very common to have amenorrhea, the cessation of menstruation, due to body fat dropping below that threshold to where they're no longer fit for reproduction. And of course, this is all talking in biological context, not that the women in the Olympics are not trying to have babies when they're trying to get a medal. And so they're risking their health when they drop below that threshold, because obviously these metabolic dials are getting turned down. But of course, you have to do that if you want to go for the elite level performance. But for most females, you don't want to drop your threshold down below. And for males, we're talking about, there's the quote from Dr. Herman Ponzer, author of Burn. He says, reproduction, repair, growth, and locomotion are a zero-sum game. If you borrow too much from one, you turn down the dials. So listeners, if you envision there's 4 dials on your screen or whatever, locomotion refers to all of our energy output, our exercise, right? So if you're locomoting your ass off like a hard training triathlete, you are going to be compelled to turn down growth, repair, and reproduction. So if you experience things like reduction in libido, frequent immune disturbances, difficulty recovering from workouts. One of the things that I'm still battling now is recurring muscle soreness, which I hate. It's so upsetting to me because it implies that I overdid it at the workout. And so I'm over locomoting. I'm doing more than my current capacity for whatever it was, the set of deadlifts or the sprint workout. And now I'm having to devote precious energy resources to repairing damaged muscle tissue rather than performing my workouts within my capacity, which would allow me to build without that unnecessary interruption of, recovering from beating myself up. And boy, the triathlete might not have persistent muscle soreness, but when you're out there for hours and hours training in 3 sports, the same symptoms pop up where you have a reduction in libido, reduction in immune function. You start to get things like digestive disturbances because the digestive system is so fragile and so sensitive to stress. And those are the things we really got to watch out for and say, hey, I'm doing something wrong here and I need to rebalance. And so back to your question about diet, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to kind of maximize my intake of nutritious foods rather than minimize and see what I can, quote, get away with, or in a ill-advised attempt to lose excess body fat, cut my calories and work out more. We know for certainty that doesn't work and it causes all kinds of problems. So the goal here is like, get as much nutritious food as you need, get 0 of the junk food, and then go be as active as you possibly can within your capabilities and monitor that. And I think most of us can handle more walking in life, right? That would be a plus. Even if you're a hard training athlete, you can spend, an extra 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour getting that form of locomotion, which is well within your threshold and it has all those health benefits, cognitive benefits.
Brad, do you have any strategies for optimizing gut health and digestion that have worked well for you?
Well, I'm so, captivated by the carnivore message as presented by the leaders like Dr. Saladino, Dr. Sean Baker, Amber O'Hearn, Michaela Peterson. And so this idea of doing a restrictive diet, I can't think of a better way to self-test than to restrict, and this is the key, as many foods as possible so that you can actually gather some good data and do some good problem solving. So, hey, it's great. You're going to go gluten-free for 30 days and eat a bunch of crappy processed foods that say gluten-free on it. That's not really what we have in mind when we're talking about healing the body. And so many people have had success with a temporary restriction of all plant foods because that's where the toxins come from. And that's where we react, especially some of the foods that are touted as being super healthy. If you can actually handle restricting those for 30 days and living off of eggs, wild-caught salmon, and grass-fed beef, then you're going to have some evaluations that can lead you down the promised path to something that will truly be optimal. And boy, I'm a guy here who I was inspired by Dr. Rhonda Patrick doing her super nutrition green smoothies in the big blender and throwing in big giant piles of raw celery and raw kale and raw spinach and beets and carrots and blending it all up into the green drink. And so I did that for a short period of time. And I remember distinctly for 3 or 4 or 5 hours after I drank this thing, my stomach would pop out like a bowling ball. And I'd even get transient sharp pains that last for 3 seconds and then they go away. And it was a little disturbing, and then it would go away, and I'd go about my busy life. But just reflecting for a moment, thinking, if I'm drinking this thing that's full of nutrients, but I have that adverse reaction, how can that be described as healthy? And so we have to, really reflect on all of our habits. And one quip that Jay Feldman offered that was pretty memorable was, if you feel better fasting as opposed to eating your usual breakfast, we better take a look at that breakfast, because that's not a good plug for the breakfast, right? And so that's kind of putting a different spin on fasting, where I feel fantastic. I feel great. I have energy all morning because I don't eat. Well, what were you eating? Was it Starbucks scone and a big caramel swirly thing? Because then, we're talking about the benefits of what you eliminate rather than the inherent benefits of fasting. And of course, there are benefits to fasting. That's when our body works very efficiently with cell repair and all kinds of anti-inflammatory response, all that great stuff. But again, let's not forget, those are stress responses. So when the body is starving, it starts to work really well and have all these wonderful cell repair benefits. But if you don't need to starve yourself, perhaps, to obtain similar benefits.
Brad, you've covered a lot of ground. I'm curious what your next book is going to be on. Is it going to be a combination of a few of the things that you've touched on here, or a few of the things you've written about previously?
Well,
can you share?
Yeah, I'm kind of working on a lot of digital programming now. And so online courses, I mentioned the online course about my morning exercise routine. So it's a series of videos. And I also wrote a 50-page ebook talking about all the benefits, the psychological benefits of getting into routine, building a habit. And I'm doing that for cold exposure is one topic that I'm working on now. I have other designs, such as doing one for how to succeed with fat reduction once and for all. Because I talk to so many enthusiasts who are doing so many things right and still complaining about the extra 5, 10, or 20 pounds of excess body fat. And interestingly, I've written about this stuff for decades, but I never really had to live it or experience what it was like to be frustrated with adding excess body fat, because I've kept myself in shape, whatever, a lifelong athlete. But then a couple of years ago, I remember stepping on a scale. I think, whatever was maybe a time where I wasn't training much. And I saw a number that I'd never seen before. I'm like, what's this? The scale's wrong. And sure enough, I'd somehow allowed about 8 or 10 pounds to creep onto my body that I'd never seen before in my adult life, dating back to, when I was a triathlete. And I've always weighed the same. But of course, some of that muscle mass changes to different body composition. I can't say I'm in, top form, but I prided myself that, I'm kind of keeping the same body. And so I, for the first time, had to go on this journey of trying to drop excess body fat. And it was really illuminating, because you kind of have to think about it and get serious about it and make these commitments that might not be pleasant and enjoyable, because you're restricting yourself and you're depriving yourself. And humans don't like to be restricted or deprived, but we get so much value and benefit from doing so that they're again back to Liver King and the people who are pushing the edges, jump in that cold water once in a while just to do it for a positive experience. But also they talk about, cold exposure as a way to drop excess body fat. And the research is interesting there, but I will say that cold exposure also spikes appetite, because the body's not stupid. You're trying to warm up. You have an intense need for fuel in the aftermath of the cold exposure. So it really should be presented as jump in the cold water and then don't eat for a while if you want to accelerate fat loss. And that part, I think people need to really appreciate. But in my case, like just by establishing some arbitrary rules, like I, adhered to my fasting period of not consuming any calories before 12 noon. And it may or may not have been the optimal long-term strategy, but I had a rule in place now that I took seriously, and I quickly lost 7 or 8 pounds of excess body fat, and I got back to where I wanted. And I proudly put my picture on Instagram to get more followers. Whoop-de-doo, here we go. But I do feel like I need to share the story and to kind of inspire all of us to say, hey, you don't have to accept, level 6 or level 5. We can beat this. We can beat this challenge together. But we got to get out of some of these bad habits and acknowledge them and take some action.
Love it. Love it. Well, there's so much good content that's been dropped in this episode. I feel like we're the three of us could probably talk for like 6 hours, honestly, but we want to be mindful of your time. Brad, what's the best way for people to connect with you just to learn more about what you've got going on?
Oh my gosh. You go to bradkearns.com. You are going to be regaled by free ebooks. Just click the button. You'll get a bunch of fun content. You can see some videos there. I got some online courses like the morning exercise routine and some other ones up there. There's a Primal Endurance Mastery course you can find on my website. And it's great to connect. I love what you guys are doing. And thanks for having me on. Thanks for listening, everybody.
We really appreciate it, Brad. Thanks a lot.
Perfect.